My parents looked me in the eye and said, "The greatest gift for your sister's wedding is if you disappear from our family forever." I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I grabbed my keys, packed my things, and walked out. The door slammed shut behind me like a final punctuation mark on 22 years of silence and sacrifice. The next morning, my apartment was listed for sale. My account frozen. My name erased as if I had never existed. And that was the moment I realized sometimes family doesn't break you quietly. Sometimes they burn you alive and call it love. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reaches. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now let me tell you everything. And if this story touches you in any way, please consider subscribing. It costs nothing, but it means the world to someone who once felt like nothing. My name is Daniel Cole Bennett, and this is how I finally chose myself. The smell of burning pine wood hit me the second I stepped through the door of the Bennett house. A smell that should have meant comfort, but always meant something else to me. The fire in the oak-paneled living room crackled like applause for a show I'd never been cast in. My eyes swept across the glass cabinet lined with Amanda's trophies, debate awards, scholarships, framed photos of her in tailored suits at tech conferences. My own certificate from when I was 17, the one I once thought mattered, was buried in the lower corner like a footnote. I hadn't even opened my mouth when my mother's voice cut through the air, brisk and precise. "The caterer needs a decision by tomorrow, and make sure the flowers arrive before noon. I can't trust anyone else to handle this." I swallowed whatever I had been about to say about a project I was working on and nodded, scribbling notes into the planner I carried everywhere. "Yes, Mom." That was my default reply, even when my hands itched to tell her about the melody I'd been working on, the one that kept me up past midnight. My father didn't look up from the armchair, only murmured, "Just don't make this more complicated than it needs to be." His tone was flat, but the implication was sharp. I was the one who usually made things messy. I forced a laugh, the kind that echoed hollow in my own ears, and kept writing, retreating into the role I knew best, invisible assistant. The screen of my mother's laptop lit up with Amanda's face from San Diego. She was in a conference room, sleek hair, confident smile. Linda leaned forward, her voice softening in a way it never did with me. "Darling, the investors are thrilled about your latest pitch. You always shine." Each word landed like a pinprick against my skin. When Amanda asked about the wedding, Linda waved at me. "Your brother's handling it." "Don't worry." Amanda smiled politely. I muttered, "I'll make sure everything's perfect," but the connection crackled and I wasn't sure if anyone heard. The door opened and Karen Phillips, my mother's friend and the wedding coordinator, breezed in with her clipboard. "This is going to be the event of the season," she said, brightly, flipping through notes, her eyes barely grazing me. She handed me a thick folder of timelines and vendor contacts. "Keep all this organized." I felt the weight of it in my arms like a rope tightening across my chest. Later that night, alone in the guest room, I opened an email that had been copied to me by mistake, a save the date sent to all the guests. There was a section listing speakers. Amanda, Jason, my parents. My name was nowhere. I was officially designated logistics. Nothing more. I set my phone down, staring across the room at the piano draped in a dust cover. I lifted the corner, pressed one muted key, and heard nothing but the faint, dull thud of silence. I wondered if I did everything flawlessly, would it matter? Or would my music always be a sound no one else bothered to hear? To understand why I kept saying yes, why I accepted being the silent technician behind my sister's triumphs. You'd have to go back to Maple Ridge summers when I was still a boy playing piano by the riverbank, while coyotes howled in the distance. I remember being 11 playing a piece I'd written myself as a birthday gift for my mother. I played with trembling fingers, proud of every note. She listened, glanced once, then smiled thinly. "That's nice, Daniel Cole Bennett. But did you know Amanda just got offered a scholarship? That's the real gift." My grin froze, but I forced myself to nod, tucking my pride away. By 13, I'd begged to stay in the school band. Linda told me to quit. "It's not practical." My father suggested I take a business elective like Amanda. I folded my sheet music in half and put it in a drawer, teaching myself the art of shrinking before anyone else could shrink me. At 17, I won a local composition award. Mark Collins, my music teacher, hugged me after the ceremony. "Don't let anyone turn down your volume," he whispered. I believed him for a moment until I got home and saw my award shoved behind Amanda's robotics trophy in the glass cabinet. My victory lasted a few hours before it was buried. When I first fell in love with Emily Rose Walker, I thought maybe someone finally saw me. She liked my music, my quiet nature, but under the weight of constant comparison and family pressure, she grew restless. "You never fight back," she said before walking away. What she saw as gentleness, my family had already rebranded as weakness. I learned silence was safer than losing people. Years blurred into chores and obligations. I became the driver when Mom had migraines, the handyman when a pipe burst, the one who fetched tea and prescriptions. Nobody thanked me. It was just assumed I would. One evening, searching for a spare checkbook in my father's desk, I found a folder labeled with my initials DCB. Inside were bills for family expenses marked paid by Daniel Cole Bennett. Medical visits, house repairs, all logged as if my contributions were a mandatory tax. My name had become a financial tool, a ledger entry, not a son. The final insult came while helping organize wedding files. I noticed the printed shopping list for the reception taped to a folder. The paper used was the back of a photocopy my photograph accepting the music award at 17. My teenage smile had been scribbled over with Linda's red pen order, 140 napkins. "Don't forget candles." My accomplishment reduced to scrap paper. My face and music literally overwritten. I tucked the page into my pocket, a quiet act of rebellion. Maybe one day it would matter that I'd saved it. For now, I just pressed my hands into my pockets, staring at the lopsided piano in the corner, Mark Collins' words echoing in my head. What would happen if, just once, I turned the volume all the way up with the house, with the warm fire crack, and split apart under the sound, I built the wedding, like I build a score layer by layer, making sure the melody and rhythm could hold the room. The venue was a refurbished horse barn at the edge of Maple Ridge. Strings of lanterns already threaded along the rafters, the old stalls scrubbed into photogenic rustic charm. I picked Iris because Amanda once said in an interview that they reminded her of first chances. I tracked them down through a grower 3 counties over the shade between blue and violet that glows at dusk. For the menu, I negotiated roast beef with mashed potatoes the way Linda preferred, and I made sure the kitchen knew to keep onions out of everything. I learned to translate taste into line items and tastes into rules. Every call I made became a note in a planner that was starting to feel heavier than any instrument I'd ever played. Karen Phillips sent me a revised timeline in the afternoon with a chirpy subject line and a buried correction that pulsed like a bruise. The slot labeled Brother of the Bride remarks had been replaced with Mother's Tribute. I read it twice to make sure I hadn't misread it. There was no place for me on the stage. There was, however, an extra 20 minutes added for investor acknowledgments. I swallowed, told myself I didn't need a microphone to belong, and started practicing belonging without being seen. I bought a gray suit that wouldn't draw criticism. In the mirror of the thrifted tailor shop, I practiced a smile that said I was fine. I looked like someone who existed only to keep a party from falling apart. Back at the office on Main Street, I labeled contracts by vendor cross-reference deliveries, printed backup copies, slid a signed sound agreement into a plastic sleeve. The audio package was the one piece I'd insisted on a clean system with a dedicated text, so vows wouldn't get swallowed by wind and room chatter. It mattered to me that Amanda's words were heard. It mattered to me that someone's words were. At our vendor meeting, the florist and caterer shook hands with Linda and Karen Phillips, then turned to me as if to confirm the details with Mrs. Bennett's assistant. Karen Phillips didn't correct it. She smiled and moved the meeting along. I wrote down their requests and stared at my own handwriting like it belonged to someone hired for a day. The box with the necklace waited for me when I got home, a narrow velvet case that felt like a promissory note. I had spent $3,000 I did not really have on a jade pendant because I thought something beautiful might bridge a gap words never could. I set it on the mannequin in my apartment, the green stone catching the lamplight, and tried to picture Amanda's face softening. It was a scene I could score in my head. The music swells. The sister understands. The crowd claps in a way that finally lands in my chest. Then I laughed under my breath because I knew I was composing fiction. Late that night, an internal email landed by accident in my inbox, forward chain intact. Karen Phillips wrote to a partner about the wedding being a launchpad for her firm's profile and for Jason's investor circle and alignment of optics and access. I read the line twice, then a third time, feeling the heat in my face fade into something colder. My labor didn't have my name on it. It had their ambitions stamped in bold. The next morning, the audio company called to confirm the setup time. By lunch, I received a notice from accounting the premium package had been canceled and replaced with a cheaper option. I opened Karen Phillips's shared notes and saw the reason typed in the margin, reallocate to VIP gifts. Linda called it practical. I thought about vows swallowed by chatter and forced myself to nod anyway. I added a line to my planner. Bring extra lapel mics from the community theater if possible. I kept solving problems I hadn't created. In the bridal party group chat, someone asked if the younger brother who wrote music was going to perform. The thread paused. Then my mother typed that it wouldn't fit the image they were curating and added a little laugh in parenthesis. No one objected. My screen felt suddenly heavy in my palm. I put the phone face down and stared at the piano in the corner of my apartment. The dust cover tugged halfway off like a coat someone didn't finish removing. I ended the night with a stack of papers laid out on the bed. Contracts, menus, seating charts. A printed speech template Linda had drafted that placed me backstage to hand over flowers if needed, and then step aside. I set that page beside the velvet box with the necklace, and watched them lie there like two intersecting lives that would never meet. The stone glowed green, and still the page waited for my signature. I wondered which one would crack first if I declined at the right time the story they kept telling about me or the ceiling beam that held this whole thing up. One day out, the house smelled like smoke and lemon polish. I carried in 4 boxes of handmade decor paper lanterns I strung with wire, laid into the night-dried wildflowers tied with twine, and set them by the hearth. I had left a 5th box at my apartment because sometimes exhaustion rearranges your memory. Linda looked at the stack, then at me, and asked where the missing box was, as if she'd caught me stealing silver. I opened my mouth to explain to promise I'd get it within the hour. She didn't wait for the explanation. You always leave something undone, she said, each word clean as a blade. My father stood from his chair, and for once his voice didn't try to soften the edges. You're making us look bad again. The room felt smaller, like the air had been edited down. I glanced up the stairs where Amanda and Jason stood side by side watching. They didn't step in. They didn't look away. Their silence was a verdict read without a judge. Karen Phillips busied herself with a clipboard and offered me a look that said she understood, and also that it wasn't her job to interfere. I hated pity more than I hated criticism. I set the folders on the coffee table, the receipts, the confirmations, the schedules that lived in my head, and walked Linda through each line. She skimmed, nodded at 3 or 4 items, then slid the pile aside with a single palm. Amanda would have done it better, she said. And in that moment, I knew there was no version of this where I belonged. I went upstairs to the old guest room and opened my laptop, more to breathe than to work. That was when I saw the email thread. I wasn't meant to see a calendar invite forwarded accidentally that included a secondary vendor for event management hired as backup. The note from Jason was plain a contingency in case I couldn't get it right. It was efficient. It was also the neatest way to remove a person without saying their name. At the venue, a volunteer asked if the bride's brother would be playing something during the cocktail hour. I checked the thread again on my phone. The answer had already been sent. My mother had said no, that I wasn't appropriate for the image. I don't know why that word stung the most appropriate, as if music was a risk, and I was a liability. Back at the house, I noticed the velvet case wasn't on the table where I'd left it. Later, I heard Linda tell someone on the phone that the family gift, a pendant Robert had chosen, would be presented during the toast. The receipt sat safe in my wallet, the ink still fresh from last week. I put my fingers on it through the leather like it was a pulse I could take. I began scanning everything on my phone: contracts, invoices, emails, the audio downgrade notice with the redirection to luxury gift baskets. The screen lit my hands in antiseptic blue. I saved files to a folder labeled with the date and a short shorthand only I would understand. The more I saved, the lighter. My chest felt like I was building a raft plank by plank. Evening fell fast, the kind of Colorado dusk that turns windows into black mirrors. Downstairs, the fire sputtered, throwing shifting light that looked less like warmth and more like a warning. Every familiar surface seemed slightly wrong. The picture frames too polished, the trophy glass too clean, the shadows in the corners holding their breath. I carried the remaining boxes to my truck, promising myself I'd retrieve the last one before midnight and fix whatever could still be fixed. When I came back inside, Robert had taken my folders off the table and stacked them by the door as if to make room for something more important. I picked them up, slid them under my arm, and heard the wood in the ceiling crack as if the house itself was shifting. In the hallway, Karen Phillips stopped me and said, "Don't take it personally." I said, "I didn't." We both knew I was lying. She touched my elbow, then let go the gesture small enough to vanish. Upstairs, I found Amanda in her childhood room. She smiled tight, told me the iris looked beautiful, and then asked if I could change the seating of 3 donors who didn't like each other. I said I would. She didn't ask how I was. When she turned back to her phone, I watched her profile lit by the screen glow and realized I had been expecting her to notice the bruise in my voice. She didn't. I closed the guest room door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed with the planner open across my knees. I checked the list of deliveries for the morning, texted the floor as a thank you confirmed with the rental company about the tent walls in case the wind came up. Then I slid my hand into my pocket and took out the receipt for the necklace, folded it once, folded it again, and tucked it behind the plastic sleeve that held the sample speech. The fire popped downstairs. Someone laughed. The house shifted again, a tiny sound like a warning. I shut the planner, listening to the board settle under my feet. The thought came uninvited and complete if I spoke tomorrow. If I pulled the right thread in the right room, the whole story they were curating might unravel. I put the planner in my bag, picked up the folders, and walked toward the stairs. The light from the living room flickered down the hallway, bright and then dim like a heartbeat that couldn't decide whether to keep going. Night settled over the Bennett house the way ash settles after a burn, quiet, powder, fine, inescapable. The fire snapped and spat in the grate its light, throwing a false warmth over the oak room. I set my planner on the coffee table and stood with my hands loose at my sides because clenched fists are a language my mother never let me speak. She didn't bother with preface. "You always ruin everything, Daniel Cole Bennett." Her voice was the clean edge of a blade. The words didn't even rise. They were placed perfectly measured as if she were correcting a spreadsheet. I felt the familiar urge to explain, to list the iris, the menu, the rentals, the backups I had engineered. My fingers touched the keys in my pocket instead and stayed there. My father stood smoothing the line of his sweater like a man straightening a portrait. "You don't belong here." He said it calmly, the way people read a thermostat. Upstairs, halfway down the staircase, Amanda and Jason watched. One hand rested on the banister, her engagement ring catching firelight. His jaw set in the pleasant neutrality of someone who doesn't intend to be drafted. Their silence did more work than any sentence could. Karen Phillips started to speak my name, a soft syllable, but stopped when Linda cut her a look that could snuff a candle. I think I nodded. I might have smiled. I learned a lifetime ago how to look agreeable while something inside me tore. Linda folded her arms. "We can't risk you derailing tomorrow." The fire popped behind her. In the burn of that moment, she gave me the line that stripped the paint off whatever was left of us. "The greatest gift for your sister's wedding is if you disappear from our family forever." The room swallowed the words and gave nothing back. I didn't apologize. I didn't bargain. I lifted the planner, slid the folder of receipts beneath my arm, and turned. The floorboards creaked like a throat clearing for a speech I would not give. When the door closed behind me, it landed with a seal, a period pressed hard at the end of a sentence that had run on for 22 years. Outside, the air was needle cold. I could see my breath and for the first time believed it belonged to me. In my apartment, the light stayed off. I set the planner on the counter and leaned against the sink, listening to the hush that comes after a storm. My phone vibrated. Tyler had sent a reminder about the live stream test. I thumbed the notification away and then opened it again. The screen filled with rehearsal glimpses, camera angles of the barn, a test pan across the lanterns I'd hung. Later, when the stream went live, I watched the soft focus of bridal white. The bright smiles, the toast rehearsal where my parents clinked glasses with Karen Phillips and a few local officials. No one asked where I was. The absence fit so neatly, it didn't even ruffle the tablecloth. I watched until my throat burned and then turned the volume down to 0. I set the velvet necklace box on the counter and stared at it the way you look at a bridge you know you can't cross. In the glow of the laptop, the stone looked almost wet. A little river held under glass. I picked up the receipt and slid it behind the lid's hinge. The apartment was a witness stand, the kind that doesn't lie. I thought about every time I had stepped aside, every apology drafted before anyone asked for one, every yes that protected a piece I was never allowed to share. Something inside me stopped trying to earn the right to breathe. I took the keys from my pocket and closed my hand around them until the edges dug crescent into my palm. The room pulsed with the quiet blue of the screen. It felt like a midnight on the verge of a morning I could choose. I opened my email not to write to my parents or to Amanda, but to pull up the old draft resignation I'd never sent and stare at the subject line. Family had always been the reason I stayed small. If my disappearance was their gift, then I knew exactly how to wrap it. I would not beg to be let back in. I would not play the background music to their celebration of my absence. I shut the laptop with a soft click that sounded like a promise and lay down on the couch without turning off the phone. The last thing I saw before sleep was the thin blue light slipping under the curtain like the first bar of a song I hadn't learned yet. By dawn, the apartment had the clean, exhausted smell of packed cardboard. I held the planner once more and then set it in a drawer. I wasn't going to be the archivist of other people's triumph anymore. If they believed vanishing was love, I could give them a love so complete, there would be no return address. The morning broke cold and glassy. I made coffee. I barely sipped open a blank email and typed my resignation after 9 years in a single paragraph without qualifiers or apologies. I attached a handover note so no one could say I was careless. Hit send and watched the message leave like a bird that had always known the right window. Then I called the realtor and told her to list the apartment immediately. I agreed to a price $30,000 under market to move fast. Speed felt like oxygen. Money felt like ballast. By noon, I was in a small conference room with Laura Ann Mitchell and Adam James Porter, the attorneys who had never once used my name like a task. We reviewed accounts, flagged the ones my parents had access to for household emergencies, and moved my savings into a trust with guardrails I could live with. I signed my name on lines that asked if I was sure. My hand trembled once, then studied. Adam double-checked the clauses. Laura reminded me that boundaries are not cruelty, and we set alerts that would ping if large withdrawals were attempted without documentation. When we finished, Laura said quietly, "You've already carried more than anyone should." I didn't answer. I didn't know how to receive sentences that held me gently. Back at the apartment, I packed the things that felt like truth. The battered guitar, the laptop, a box of scores, the velvet case with the necklace, the folder of receipts, a sweater that still smelled faintly of cedar. I left behind the couch the mismatched dishes, the framed prints I'd hung to make other people comfortable. Somehow the rooms looked bigger after I took myself out of them. I loaded the pickup, checked the oil, and cued a playlist loud enough to drown the voice in my head that had always sounded like my mother. The road cut through familiar pasture and then shouldered up into the mountains. Snow lived on the shoulders of the peaks. The sky was a hard, clean blue. At the first gas station, I caught my reflection in the dirty bathroom mirror and didn't recognize the steadiness in my own face. Without the role I'd been assigned, I looked younger and more tired at the same time. I washed my hands and watched water beat on my knuckles like a small blessing. On the highway, my phone lit with a text from Linda. "Family doesn't act like this. Come back." I let the screen go dark. A few miles later, Robert messaged, "Your mother is in the hospital, critical." I pulled onto the shoulder, the truck ticking as it cooled, and called Dr. Sarah Jane Morgan. She answered on the third ring. "She had a panic episode," Dr. Morgan said. "She's stable and safe at home now." The truth stripped the urgency from my fear, leaving it plain and honest. I thanked her and drove on. Near the state line, an email arrived from Amanda. She wrote that she was sorry for the tone at the house, that things were complicated, that our parents were under pressure, that it would help everyone if I returned for a few days to smooth things over. She used my name twice, and both times it read like a PR memo. I stared at the words, "help everyone," until they blurred, and then closed the message without replying. It wasn't that I lacked compassion. It was that mine had been spent like petty cash without receipt for years. Somewhere past the third motel, the town paper's push alert lit my phone. A quote from Linda. "My son stole from us and abandoned his sick mother." The article used a photo from Amanda's rehearsal dinner where my parents looked like a painting of composure. I pulled into a turnout overlooking a valley pocked with ponds and took the folder from the passenger seat. The receipts rattled in their sleeves. Every copay I'd covered, every repair I'd paid for. I pressed the folder to my chest and breathed. Proof doesn't soothe the heart, but it holds the line while you rebuild it. The second day arrived with sleep and a headache I refused to read as omen. I slept at a roadside motor lodge, drank bad coffee, brave enough to slap me awake, and drove west until the mountains softened into fur and fog. Late afternoon, a ping from Adam, an attempted withdrawal flagged by the trust for $10,000 marked urgent house repairs. No documents attached. The request was denied automatically. Adam added that the system was working exactly as designed. I laughed a short sound, not cruel, just surprised. I wasn't used to structures holding for me. By the time the air began to taste like salt, the truck was humming in a way that felt almost like relief. The road descended into a coastal town chiseled out of mist. Seabrook lived up to its name. Boats nosed together along the docks, gulls carving lazy loops, storefronts painted in weathered blues and creams. I found the small rental a wooden place with a porch that bowed a little in the middle and windows freckled by old storms. The floor complained when I crossed it a familiar music that didn't once ask me to be smaller. I set the guitar against the wall, opened the windows to let the sea in, and placed the planner on the table before deciding I didn't need it tonight. I plugged in the laptop and watched the screen bloom to life. No wedding footage, no group chats, no instructions, just a blank project and the sound of water hitting rock like a metronome I could follow. Outside, fog moved the way breath does when you're finally alone. I sat on the porch steps with a cheap pen and a legal pad and wrote a few measures of something that refused to be pretty. It sounded like leaving and arriving at the same time. My phone buzzed on the railing with new headlines I didn't open and messages I no longer owed answers to. Somewhere in the distance, a buoy rang and then went quiet. When the cold reached my knuckles, I went inside, locked the door, and leaned my back against it, without fear the house would push me out. In the mirror over the sink, I saw someone who had stopped negotiating with the fire for warmth that never belonged to him. I turned off the light and listened to the tide reset the shoreline over and over like a lesson. At the edge of sleep, I pictured the barn lantern swinging in a wind I didn't have to gauge, and the table where my name had never been printed. Then I let both images go. The ocean kept time. The room held steady. On the other side of a life with no role to perform, I asked myself out loud, because no one could shush me here, what music I would write for myself from now on. The first weeks in Seabrook carried the quiet of a place that did not know my name. The floors in the small wooden house creaked like they were relieved to carry someone who asked for nothing but shelter. Salt filmed the windows and gulls scissored the air beyond them. For a moment I thought I had outrun Maple Ridge. But one morning in the cafe where I had started writing again, the news on my screen dragged me back. A local Colorado outlet had quoted my mother. Her son stole money. Her son abandoned a sick woman who gave him life. The headline was written to sting. I stared at it long enough for the letters to blur, then pulled the folder from my bag and spread receipts, contracts, and records across the table. Every note of proof was mine, and this time I refused to let them call silence guilt. Laura Ann Mitchell and Adam James Porter appeared on my laptop screen that evening, faces steady and precise through the video call. They reassured me. The trust was airtight that every cent had been accounted for, that I was not the criminal in their story. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was defending myself alone. Their words steadied me like sandbags against a storm tide. Mia poured coffee at my side in the cafe the next morning, her bracelets clinking softly. She listened without interrupting, as I explained the article, the accusations, the line my mother had crossed. She tilted her head and asked, "If you went back, what would change?" The question pressed harder than any insult. I had no answer. My throat tightened, not with defense, but with the ache of finally being seen. That night I walked down to the harbor, the wind pushing salt into my eyes, the water rough against the pilings. I thought of the wedding live stream of laughter rising in the barn while I sat in darkness of glasses clinking in my absence. The sound had haunted me like applause I could never earn. But as the tide crashed and pulled back, I realized I didn't need their clapping. The waves were louder, steadier, and they belonged to me. Amanda's name lit up my phone later that week. Her message was polite. Even plaintive, could I allow a withdrawal for Mom, just a small amount? She was caught between them and me. I read it twice and understood what she was really protecting, the sheen of her company, the narrative that kept her flawless. I closed the message without answering. My silence was not surrender this time. The following day, a mediator reached out claiming my mother was considering legal action against me for creating an unauthorized trust. I laughed once, dry and sharp. All the hours I had worked, every dollar I had earned, and now they wanted to flip the truth on its head. The absurdity steadied me more than fear ever could. That night I lifted the cover off the small piano in the rental house, its keys chipped and uneven. I pressed a chord, then another, sketching the beginning of a new piece. The melody rose raw and salt-heavy, pulled straight from the sea outside my window. I played until tears blurred the keys, not from pain, but from recognition. For the first time, the sound filled the room without being hushed or dismissed. The house listened. The tide answered. The music was mine, loud and unapologetic. I titled the score Chord. It was not an echo in a hollow valley. It was a song that belonged here to me, to no one else. And when I set the pencil down, I asked myself if I was brave enough to let the world hear it, to tell the story my family wanted to bury not as a secret, but as truth. The news broke slowly, like light slipping under a door. Laura Ann Mitchell and Adam James Porter released the documents we had prepared, every receipt, every account, every line, proving I had done nothing but protect what was mine. The article that followed stripped away months of accusations. I wasn't a thief. I wasn't a deserter. I was simply someone who had finally stopped being the family's silent accountant. Linda and Robert had no comment. Amanda avoided reporters with the same smile she used in boardrooms. Their refusal to defend themselves was louder than any words, a silence that admitted what they would never say outright. In Seabrook, the community arts center filled with neighbors and strangers. I sat at the piano. The sheet music of Chord opened before me. My hands shook, then steadied as I pressed the first chord. The melody rose and curled through the room like surf against the dock, carrying everything I had buried in Maple Ridge. When the final note fell, the audience answered with real applause, warm, unmeasured, human. I bent my head, overwhelmed for once. Sound had come back to me, not as an echo, but as belonging. Afterward, Laura projected the records onto a screen. The truth was visible. I hadn't abandoned anyone. I had only stopped being their supply line. People nodded. Some touched my shoulder. Others simply listened. Vindication wasn't triumph. It was clarity, and it was enough. Later that night, Tyler sent me a message. He still had the recording of my mother's words, her demand that I vanish forever. He asked if I wanted him to publish it. I looked at the screen, then set the phone down. I didn't need revenge. I already had freedom. A final text arrived from Linda. If you leave, don't ever come back. I read it once, then deleted it. For the first time, those words felt like a blessing, not a curse. The next evening, a filmmaker approached me after hearing my piece. She wanted me to compose for her film. I said yes easily, not to prove myself, but because the work felt alive. I ended the night on the pier, the ocean restless under a blood-red sky. I opened my journal and wrote, "Family is not always the people tied to you by blood. Sometimes family is the place where your voice is heard without permission." I closed the book and breathed in salt air, steady and free. The waves crashed again and again, louder than any applause I had ever craved. And in that rhythm I whispered to myself, I choose me.